The big remaining question, let me just address it finally before we move on, is that what do you do in those situations? I'm asked this over and over again, where the criteria of legitimacy are manifestly satisfied, but for whatever reason, cynical, opportunistic, indefensible it might be, you cannot get a Security Council resolution passed because one of the big powers is exercising a veto, Russia or China or whatever. What do you do in those situations? Do you just accept that and say, well, under no circumstances can military force be contemplated because that legality criterion hasn't been satisfied, or is there some other way through it? We all want to think there's some sort of way through it when we confront these incredibly indefensible vetoes. And the Kosovo case in 1999, I think, is the one that sticks in most people's memory as a pretty, I mean, there's still one or two people take a different view, but basically people say this is the classic case of every criterion of legitimacy being satisfied, but the criterion of legality wasn't. Nonetheless, US, UK, France went in and did their stuff in Kosovo, and serious genocidal massacres were arguably averted as a result. Was that an indefensible thing to do? None of us really want to say it is, but how do you intellectually deal with that dilemma? It's very, very real. We struggled with a way to handle that in our report, and I'm not sure that we quite got it right. What I've found talking about this and thinking about this in subsequent years is the best way of answering this is, I think, by reference to the domestic law principle, certainly in common law jurisdictions. I think it's equally applicable in Roman law jurisdictions and others around the world. The idea of the plea in mitigation. The idea of the plea in mitigation. You don't contest that what you did was illegal, technically, but you throw yourself on the mercy of the judicial authority by saying it was so morally defensible in all the circumstances that I ought not to be actually punished, or not punished with any degree of severity. Yes, officer, I did run the red light. I acknowledge I ran the red light. I was in breach of the law, but I had to get my wife to the hospital. She's giving birth to a baby in the back seat. That sort of case, a plea in mitigation, utterly familiar, utterly morally familiar, I think, to all of us. And provided you don't overdo it, and provided you don't make that plea in mitigation every second week for some case, everything's an exception. I think you can live with the reality that from time to time there are going to be cases, and maybe the Duma, the response to the chlorine, even though it was thought to be sarin, it wasn't sarin, it was actually chlorine, and maybe that wasn't da-da-da-da-da. It was a defensible response, I think, in terms of the criteria of legitimacy, even though there was no legal foundation for it. I think Kosovo was certainly legitimate. But you've got to think long and hard before ever going down that particular path. But that's the way I would sort of try to navigate my way through that dilemma. But let's pretend that it's not a dilemma, it's a very, very real one.